Hello, we're back and we're in the afternoon here on Friday at the CNPS 2019, and we just heard an amazing talk by our a Lifetime Award recipient. He hasn't gotten that, so he's not an award recipient yet. But tonight we're going to be having our banquet, and that's going to be quite a good time. It's good food, and some awards being handed out, and some surprise awards, which you guys don't know about. But I thought we put together the second segment because there was a part when I first saw Dr. Pollack's work at the 2010 NPA conference in Maryland. When I saw his work, my first comment to Greg Volk was, wait a minute, this isn't like upending anything really revolutionary. They're just actually just finding something very physical in the physical world that's a new state of some type of matter. It's not like taking someone's job away. It's not like saying everything you've done for the last 30 years of your life was invalid because no longer do we think black holes are valid or you're a relativist and relativity is wrong. And so I was a little curious, and then I started hearing Dr. Pollack talk about the pushback he was getting, and I'm thinking, that can't be. And I also saw on his website, on his webpage, about him reading about scientific activism. And of course, he has this new institute. And why don't you tell us a little bit about, we've heard you speak about the amazing things you guys discovered, your students are doing, people around the world now are doing, opened up actually more people doing things. I think it didn't pull away. How in the world could something like this, which is really a discovery, it's not a takeaway, it's not saying, look, your job's invalid. How is it that can cause ripples or problems for someone?
I don't know where to start. Okay, let me start. You know, usually it's human nature, I think, that is responsible. We all like to feel secure in what we're doing and what we're thinking. Some of us have achieved something in life, and once we've achieved that, we don't like to be dethroned, so to speak. And that occurs in virtually every endeavor in life. You know, if you're the CEO of a company, you want the company to grow and you want to enjoy the prestige. And if someone comes along and comes with a new company that threatens to produce a better gizmo or something, you're scared and you don't, it's threatening to you. So it's the threat that really, it's a psychological issue that I think is the underlying. So for example, if you, suppose somebody comes to you, let's suppose that this is an era where all of us are thinking the earth is flat. Okay? And you come up with the idea that this would be a kind of idea that may come out of this particular organization, that maybe the earth is not flat, maybe it's a sphere. So you go and you make a presentation or put in an application to a funding agency and you say, you know, I got preliminary evidence that the earth is not flat, but it's a sphere, it's round. And my preliminary evidence is, well, I've seen some photographs from satellites, and I could see that it looks round, it's not flat. And by the way, I took off from Seattle, and I knew the earth was flat, and I was looking down from the airplane, and the first thing I was looking for is the edge of the flat earth. I peered out the window conscientiously. I could never find that edge. And I went all the way from Seattle to Tokyo, and then to Moscow and London and New York and Seattle, and I didn't find any edge of the earth. And by the way, I got back to where I came from. So I don't understand how the earth could be flat. I think it's round. I have this preliminary evidence. Please, this is an important subject. National Science Foundation or whatever, please fund me, because if I'm right, this is pretty important. So imagine what happens at the funding agency. Okay, so you're the administrator of the funding agency, an application comes in and says, I would like to get some money to study the shape of the Earth. I think it's really round, it's not flat. I have this preliminary evidence. And you think, this is pretty important, right? I better assemble the world's experts on the shape of the Earth to see if this revolutionary idea has any merit to it or not. So you get together a group of reviewers, all the group here. These are the people who are the most esteemed and most distinguished scientists studying the little bumps on the flat Earth and stuff like that, you know. And you say to them, please, you guys are the world's experts, take a look at this application. Does it require funding? Is it good enough to merit funding or not? And everybody sitting around the table is very unhappy with this application. They feel threatened because they're the experts on the flat Earth. If someone comes along and says, you know, I'm proposing that your life's work is useless. The Earth isn't really flat with a few bumps, it's round. What do you think is going to be the response of the people doing the reviewing? Very unhappy. So what they'll do is that they'll have some discussion, and 2 or 3 people will have read the application, and you will say, well, you know, it's a pretty interesting application. We're actually very much in favor of novel ideas here, but I'm not so sure I like this application. The experiments that have been proposed are not the best experiments. Let's tell them to go home and rewrite the application and put some statistical analysis in it or something like that that makes it meritorious. You're the guy who does it, all the way from Nigeria, coming to this review panel, and everybody sitting around you is thrilled with your response because they want exactly that. The last thing they want is for this to be funded. So, because it preserves their reputation. Just go away, we don't want to hear anything about round Earth. It's too threatening, it's too scary. So I think this is the central principle. This is what inhibits science from moving ahead at the rate that it should be moving ahead. If I were to ask you, for example, how many revolutions in science in the past 30 years or so, or 40 years, I don't mean technological revolutions like the iPhone or something. How many scientific revolutions equivalent to, say, the sequencing of DNA or the splitting of the atom, or I mean the really important stuff that has changed everybody's lives? It's really hard to pinpoint. You can pinpoint technological revolutions, but I don't know that I can pinpoint any scientific revolution in the past 30 years that has impacted our lives in one way or the other. That doesn't, not something that promises to do it, but something that has done it. And why is that? And I think it's the principle that I just mentioned, that we're all threatened by somebody who is trying to disprove what we feel comfortable thinking is truth. And the system has gotten so entrenched that any scientist, and you people are certainly among the leaders in that field, anybody who has a contrary idea, they know ahead of time that there's no way that they're going to get funding from any agency because of the reasons that I was just mentioning. If someone feels threatened, you won't get funding. So that's why one reason why we developed the institute Institute for Venture Science, because it gives people a chance. There's actually 2 points I want to mention about that. Stop me if I'm going on too much. Okay, 2 points. First is, you got to have an opportunity for funding. If you come with your round Earth idea in a flat Earth agency, you won't get money, but if you come to us, you may get money because it's really important and we want to give you a head start. However, we realize, like many of the people in the room who've come forth with, you might say, revolutionary ideas, that even if you get the money, even if you get more evidence, you're still very low probability that your idea will be accepted by the mainstream people. For the same reason, you know, if you're right, they're wrong. And they don't want to be wrong because it displaces them from their position. So if you do happen to get a little bit of money and make some strides, you have 3 or 4 new pieces of evidence that the Earth is round instead of being flat, do you really think you'll gain the acceptance of the other people? I don't think it will, because they're going to dig their heels in even more, because they really don't want you to succeed. I'm not suggesting that every scientist is like that, but there's a predisposition that we all have. We want to be right, and we want to feel secure, and we want we don't want to be displaced. So if you're successful and you do that, they're going to dig their heels in even more, and you're going to be in a worse position. And what's going to happen with the internet is very simple. You know, they're going to say, "Oh, that guy, he's a crackpot. Don't pay any attention to him." And once you get that label, it's really difficult to stand up and wave a flag. "Oh no, I'm not a crackpot." So you're finished, basically. "Oh, that guy is very controversial." If you look on Wikipedia, you'll find, "Oh, this person has come up with such and such an idea. It's very, very controversial, and almost nobody thinks that it's correct," something like that. You're doomed. So, our institute gets around that. How does it get around that? It gets around it if we fund your round Earth idea. We're going to fund up to a dozen other laboratories, independent laboratories, who also think there's some merit to this idea of round Earth, because they've seen some evidence also. They're independent, they're pursuing the same general question using other methods in other laboratories, and next year, at the annual meeting of the Shape of the Earth Society, or CNPS, whatever, and suddenly a dozen laboratories, independent of one another, are coming and reporting the Earth is round, it's not flat. It's almost impossible to not pay attention to that. If you have a dozen laboratories, all the young people are coming and saying to their mentor, "Hey, what's going on here?" A dozen laboratories using different methods, giving the same result, contrary to what we've all been believing. Young people are impressionable, they'll pick it up, and pretty soon we think this is going to lead to a scientific revolution, to multiple scientific revolutions. That's our plan. The basic plan is fund people with promising ideas, very thoroughly vetted. I think we have a more thorough vetting system than any organization that exists. And then funding handsomely the people who proposed it, and up to a dozen other laboratories who are pursuing essentially the same idea. And you'll help us find those people. We think this is going to restore scientific revolutions and turn science back into the exciting endeavor that it once was and should be, instead of the boring stuff that's going on all around in so many academic circles, where the intent is somewhat to find truth, but it's more heavily directed to getting published in the most prestigious journal and getting money. And you get money if you publish a lot of papers, the quantity, and you publish in the right place. It's kind of like the mice trying to get a little bit of cheese and starting the battles with one another to see who gets the cheese. To summarize, I didn't mean to give a speech, but you opened me up. This is an issue of sociology or psychology. We all want to be in charge. We want to be right in what we do, and therefore, someone who challenges us, we want to get rid of them as the best way possible. So you started by saying that I've had pushback. I got to tell you that there's been only a modest amount of pushback. It really surprised me, because I used to be in the muscle contraction field. I thought we had the right answer, and the people in the field, headed by Sir Andrew Huxley, a Nobel Prize winner, and the president of the Royal Society, etc., there's no way. He was so dominant in the field that there's no way, no matter what evidence you have, people would follow in his footsteps because they wanted to be anointed by him, rather than follow some revolutionary idea, no matter what the evidence presented. I thought the same thing would happen. People paid almost no attention to what we produced, and I thought that what we produced was good stuff, and really interesting and fundamental stuff. And it got published in good journals and whatever, and my students got good jobs and such, but almost nobody ever mentioned any of our work. Not once in my whole career was I ever invited to give a talk at a muscle meeting, at the annual muscle meetings. They simply didn't want me to talk because they felt a threat, and I felt honored by that. I went to the meetings, but I never got a chance to speak because they didn't want to hear what I had to say. At some private meetings and various places I did get a chance, but not the standard ones. So I was really surprised when I wrote this second book in 2013, Fourth Phase of Water. I expected a lot of negative feedback, and I got some from a few scientists. I found that most academic scientists were just not paying any attention. Those people who are in the so-called water science field, it's as though our stuff doesn't exist. They simply pay no attention to it. Most of them are doing simulations, computer simulations, and our stuff doesn't exist at all, despite the fact that quite a few scientists are beginning to pick up and do experiments. But to my surprise, the people who have really been paying attention to it are the spiritual people, hugely, because they feel and they know there's some connection between spirituality and water. And also, those people in medicine and alternative medicine, because they know that water is critically important for life and for all biological processes. So they've been embracing it to the point where I've gotten invited to so many conferences that I can't accept all the invitations. It's very flattering. And when people write to me, every day I get multiple emails. I've seen your book, I've seen your YouTubes, and this is great, and I have a question, or 2, or 3, or 4, or 10. I'm having difficulty responding to all of those. So the impact has been so much more positive than I ever could anticipate, with some blowback, for sure. So, yeah, okay, long answer to your short question.
No, that's not a problem. That's not a problem at all. Obviously, we feel very honored to have you here because I know that reputation. I've heard other people who have that. A couple of questions. One, how has this been accepted in the professorship here at this community, in the community here at the university? Because one of the things is, if we go as a group we go at universities, we go there. Because in some sense we're at a university, we're doing work in science, we're not accepted. Once in a while, in the last 20 years, some people in the mainstream have sort of showed up. But obviously you're at I guess part of it's no one's paying attention maybe, but is it the case that, when you're in a room full of people that are challenging Einstein, the Big Bang, particle physics, those kinds of things, is there, what do other professors think about it? Is it just ignored, like you said? Because it's a curiosity, because one of the problems in this room is that we have people like Toshi went to MIT and talked with people who were in the beginning interested. They showed interest because of his ideas. And they showed merit, and they do have merit in our opinion. But then this other thing kicks in. How is that? Is that because what you're doing is a little less getting rid of, you say you were giving the flat earth, but in some sense it doesn't sound like what you are doing, or your discovery of the fourth phase of water, is that like going from flat earth to round earth. How did you, if it's not so controversial, you're getting mostly positive things, you're in front of a group this is more flat earth, round earth to flat earth, like you said. How's that dynamic go, or do you see?
So I had difficulty at this university in my department. I don't like to name names or such, but at one time I was a very popular faculty member, and a lot of friends among the faculty. I was working in the field of muscle contraction, and I found out afterward that muscle contraction is such a small field. I didn't think so at the time, but it's really a circumscribed field, and not too many people at the university were particularly interested in the field, and so there was no blowback, almost none. There was some, and it was okay. And then I started studying water, and in the first book, I was pretty upfront in naming some sacred cows that I thought were not sacred at all. In fact, they were dead wrong. And I was actually imposing myself against a giant establishment, especially in the School of Medicine, where is my official appointment in medicine. Our department is medicine and engineering. A lot of people were not happy with it because I was challenging them. And I began to get blowback, I like that word, blowback, especially from my department, because I was this crazy guy who was coming up with ideas that challenged so many of the mainstream people in this major university that is very highly ranked. I think we've been number one in federal research support in the country among all public universities. A lot of very impressive people and various Nobel laureates and whatever. It was not popular that I was challenging many people in the medical school. And unfortunately, the various people responsible for the leadership took their, I don't know, their unhappiness or their embarrassment that this loose cannon was in the department. And some funny things happened that in retrospect, they're not happening now, but in retrospect, it was like kindergarten stuff. I mean, for example, we had a grant from the National Institutes of Health, and the grant was one of these special grants that they give. It's called transformative grant, and they gave very few of those, and I was the first one at our university ever to get one. This inspired a lot of resentment among other people, and we had $500,000 a year. This was 8 or 10 years ago. Do what you want, essentially. And this was good money. We could do a lot, and what appeared in that book, The Fourth Phase of Water, largely came because of the freedom that we had to 5 years of $500,000 a year. We could do some long-term work. It was great. And right in the middle of that, I was discussing a possible collaboration with Luc Montagnier, who I mentioned earlier, a Nobel laureate, to study something about memory of water. And I was proposing that in some communication to one of the administrators in the department that we might be thinking about this in the future, about a collaboration. And next thing I knew, I was told that my money is frozen, that I can't spend any money in my grant until I get special approval from NIH. So I called NIH, I called my administrator, and he said, well, you know, it can't be so, because the department has no such authority to restrict that unless they suspect fraud, which is not the issue here. So it took 3 weeks before I got a response, an official response from NIH, and what they said is, you better get this straightened out pretty soon, because if you're not spending the money, if you can't spend the money, we have to take the money back. And if I were you, I would hire a lawyer, because they can't do this. The university does not like to hear about hiring lawyers. That's the last thing they want, because it makes its way into the local newspapers and TV and whatever. At the same time, I got an apology from a person who said to me that, you know, you can't spend your money. It took the provost of the university to order the 2 deans to make sure that that was reversed. They both came the same day, 3 weeks later. So this is one example of a lot of blowback that seems so childish from this point of view. And I understand the rationale for it, because people feel threatened. They feel threatened by someone who comes along and comes up with a radical idea. And you may think it's not as radical as, say, the round earth, flat earth, and perhaps you're right, but it's pretty radical among those who understand biology and know about water, because, you know, everybody's known for a long time that water has 3 phases. And the idea of a 4th phase, although we're not original in the idea of an ordered phase, many people have been talking about it, but still, put together in a book that I think many people have said is easily digestible by non-experts, that's why it's become popular, is rather radical and revolutionary. And what follows from the book is also radical. The idea, for example, that I presented that water is critical for all actions in the cell. If you read a cell biology book, you won't find that at all. You'd have a hard time even finding the word water in the index. I tried. You should try it, anybody. There may be, in chapter 1, there will be mentioned that everybody knows the cell is filled with water, blah, 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 but that's about it. The water, most life scientists consider water to be the background carrier of the more important molecules of life. That's all. It just sits there. It's like a bathtub in which you bathe. It doesn't do anything. And our evidence is exactly the contrary, that not only does it not do anything, it does something, and what it does is absolutely central to everything that happens in your body. So it's a revolution. If it becomes accepted, I don't know that it will become accepted, but if it becomes accepted and is right, or even being right or wrong is a different issue, but if it's accepted, then it basically leads to a new biology and a new medicine, because everything is different.
Yeah, that's pretty. You also mentioned a couple things on support, because oftentimes when you are at that point where the person's saying you can't use your money, the people who step in at the top don't end up on your side.
Well, it's hard to know whether they're on my side or not on my side, but there's been essentially zero exposure of any of this to the university publications and newspapers, and usually they're pretty good about picking out interesting stuff, and they report every day there's something new on the website. Some of that stuff is not so interesting, but nothing. And also at one time when I was really hungry for money after that big grant expired, it can't be renewed. It's 5 years and that's it. If you want to try to get it renewed, you have to change fields. So I couldn't get it renewed, so I needed money. And I actually wrote to our 2 senators and local member of the House to see if they can do something about maybe getting an application through the Center for Alternative Medicine, which is part of NIH, because a lot of people have become interested in this stuff. I never got a response from the 2 senators and the House member. I wrote again, and I never got a response. And you always get responses. Someone down the line, some functionary will write a polite letter to you. Oh, Senator so-and-so has received, and I've done the same and have received responses. You always get a response because the politicians want to be accepted. And I don't know what happened exactly, but it's kind of odd. I know that there's a representative to the NIH from the University of Washington. And a lot of stuff, I suppose, goes through that person. It never got to, apparently never got to those senators. Someone is responsible, I don't know who, but if it happened to one senator, okay, but it happened to 2 of them, same thing, and to the member of the House. Right now, we're funded reasonably, not through the government, because getting money from the government is a real challenge, but there are some people from some private organizations who have stepped forth and said, hey, we like what you're doing, we want to fund you. And I feel really happy about that. We've all become friends, and I feel secure in that, and it really helps because we're now going full steam ahead.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. Very good. Well, I want to turn it over because I know you have to leave before coming back for the banquet. Do we have any questions or comments or the discussion? Last night, actually, we met at Cynthia Whitney. She's our chief scientist. She got her degree at MIT in physics and relativity. Immediately went to go to a job where she was working on some positional gyroscopes or something like that, and her thesis was on special relativity. And she was all excited because she said she was going to apply special relativity to a real practical problem.
But she lives in Boston. She lives in Boston.
She moved.
Oh, she moved.
She's in Redmond now.
Wow. Okay. Yeah.
But she said this story, and what happened was she applied special relativity to the problem, and it broke. It wouldn't work.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And so at her house, we were going around talking about all the stories about the journeys people had and the discovery of something. Obviously, the people in this room aren't here because hey, I was on the beach one day and I came up with this, like the surfer dude who has a 256-dimensional thing and they're talking about. But these people have stories and journeys, and oftentimes those journeys involve going to the universities and finding out, the resistance to this. And one of the, for instance, the Electric Universe is doing an experiment that's costing millions.
Yeah.
Obviously, somebody who has money is saying, look, we're the Sapphire Project, and we're really interested in doing something to help out. I mean, we get some money for this organization from some of the people in the organization who are not millionaires, but help out a little bit. And so you were saying for your institute right now, you're looking for people to fund projects, very practical, very, almost engineering. And one of the things I know that a lot of the people in this group are engineers. And I think that's one of the things that was grates upon us, is that you can give me the equations all you want, all the empirical things to describe a body in motion, but you never tell me what it is. Engineer wants to find that out. So in your institute, if somebody in this room had a really earth-changing experiment or technology, are you open to all of science, or is it only in a particular area?
We're open to all of science, but the word is science. We don't fund technology. The reason we don't fund technology is often, not always, often technologies are supported by investors who hope to make some financial gain. But in fundamental science, there's nobody to fund. And we slip in and hope to be able to fund some of those amazing projects.
Wow, that's what you want to hear, right? Because most of the time, even when people in their best intentions try to start an institute, oftentimes they'll find themselves being persuaded to go off to something that's going to make money because they feel, well, we're not getting the money. I know you're looking for investors, right?
Well, not investors, donors.
Donors, right, no, for sure.
But we could call them investors because the people who actually donate are going to be close to our institute. And the people close to the institute will know what's going on, what fundamental discoveries are being made, and would then be in a position to be the first to capitalize on what and invest in some technology that comes out of the fundamental finding. So there is, in that sense, it is a kind of investment.
Okay, and the other question is obviously there are some hotbeds of people who have a lot of money, and those are often associated today in the software business, sometimes the hardware business. And obviously around this university, you see incredible influence by the Gates. The guy also, I can't remember his name, who I think just passed away. So there is money here. Are any of those people?
Paul Allen.
Paul Allen, right, yeah. Paul Allen. I mean, obviously I was going by and I was watching all this, I go, wow, now, there's this building, there's this. Have you approached these people?
Could you tell me how? the number of barriers between us and them, high barriers are erected. And the philosophies of some of these mega companies differ from, the Gates Foundation is directed toward practical solutions to problems that plague the world. And, to their credit, they're doing many things that are helpful. Some areas are more controversial, but we're not doing that. It's not practical solutions to problems, although we know that whenever there's a scientific revolution, many practical consequences follow. You can't predict them because you don't know about them. So this is, you might say, a more fundamental level than what some of these organizations are accustomed to funding.
One of the things we did a year or two ago, I got some free software for doing universities online. Because when we see in this group very differently the history of the last 100 years. We see revolutions inside the group. For instance, like Infinity, many of us see that as a very big step, like Glenn Borkert, who introduced it. That's one kind of a person. We have other people who have introduced other things. But what it seems like to me that we, even not only just in the last 100 years, but in thousands of years, which you're talking about the psychological component of this, our universities just do not, especially in certain areas. If you are a person that's going to have a new app and software here at this university, and I'm going to disrupt boating, or whatever it is, or disrupt taxi driving, or disrupt some, they go, wow, this is great, let's go for it. But if you are a person who has in hand a very credible and very believable and very doable experiment that would show, and one of its effects would show that special relativity, for instance, does not work. And you go to your professor, which is, I know a mentor of mine who had and has this experiment, and gave it to 2 grad students in the master's. And they would come to you and they would say, hey, I have this experiment I want to do. And in both cases, the professors said, close the door, sit down, and sat them down and says, do you want a career in physics? And they said, yes. He said, you don't want to do this experiment. Now, is this something really pervasive? Is this something that you, obviously, you have a different attitude? Is this something that's always going to be there? Is there a chance that maybe because we can do our own online universities and start doing things and accepting that that is some type of revolution just in the way we teach?
That's a good question. The resistance comes if someone comes to me and says, you know, special relativity, there's something wrong, I want to do some experiments. I'm actually broadly interested in other areas of physics and chemistry. And I know that my reaction would be moderately open-minded, but for most people, see, if a student does some work in their laboratory, then the professor is associated inevitably with that work. And if you're associated with the work, which an anti-mainstream work, no matter how brilliant the experiment, if you're associated, you'll earn the ridicule of your colleagues. And nobody wants to earn the ridicule of their colleagues. And nobody was going to say, you're challenging Einstein? You can't do that. I mean, there's some things you can do and some things you can't do, and I don't want to be associated with this because I'm going to lose my my reputation. And that's the issue. It's the same issue that I mentioned a moment ago. People are nervous. People are scared. They want to be respected by their colleagues. In order to be respected, you don't challenge the towering geniuses of our time. You simply don't do it. Of course, it needs to be done because, you know, these are the people we're talking about are people. They eat the same food. They pee in the same pot, or did once upon a time. And they're just human beings who happen to come up with some idea. They're highly challengeable. Well, I actually myself start with the philosophy that I don't believe anything in the textbook unless it's simple and it makes obvious sense to me. Otherwise, I'm highly skeptical of almost everything. That makes me a kind of pariah a little bit, but that's where I start. That makes sense to me. And I guess I've done enough science to be in a position where I can say, philosophize, if you will, and that's where I am. So the work in the future that we're doing, I'm doing whatever, I have 3 books I'm working on, and these books deal with questions that are, you know, extremely fundamental, like what spins the Earth. Most people don't think about that. Why does it rain, or why does it not rain? You see clouds up there. What's gravitation really about? I have some ideas on that. How do birds really fly? That would seem a strange question to ask, because everybody will say, oh, obviously birds fly by flapping their wings. In my house, which is not far from the university, I look out, there's an eagle's nest and a lake, Lake Washington, and I see the eagles flying every day, and they don't usually flap their wings a whole lot, very little. They take off and they glide, and they glide, sometimes they glide level, sometimes they go down, sometimes they go up, and they glide into the wind, against the wind, with the wind, 90 degrees off the wind, whatever, and they do this all the time regularly without flapping their wings. So do seagulls. If any of you have a chance to take the ferry to Bainbridge Island, there's such, while you're here, you'll see the seagulls, and the seagulls are generally keeping up with the ferry, usually to the side or the back, sometimes 100 meters from the ferry, and they're gliding along without flapping their wings. And they're going along with the ferry at 20 knots or whatever, sometimes into a headwind of 20 knots, and they're not flapping their wings, and they're just keeping up, and they look so relaxed and happy. How do they do this? So when you think of questions like this, the idea that birds are flying because they push the air, something is wrong with that. And so what I'm working in the future are some of these questions that are sort of too obvious to ask. I'm asking the questions. And I think for science in the future, this is what it's all about. And many people will say, oh, you have this idea. Someone would have thought of it 30 years ago if it had any merit. Well, I'm not so sure about that. So anyway, I think I've more than answered the question that you asked. It's pretty scary and risky for someone who's a professor at a university to associate with or engage in anything that smacks of revolution. And this guy was right about the career in physics of a student who's challenging the grades. It just won't work. However, our institution, or Institute for Venture Science, along the line, we're planning to put together a university. And the university will be much different from other universities. And one of the courses that will be standard for every student is to take your favorite theorem, Bernoulli's principle, or whatever, and go through the history of it, and tell us how much we should believe it or not believe it. Not many people do that. In this particular case, there are many arguments against the veracity of that theory. I mean, this is maybe not a...
No, Bernoulli, I know we had a guy actually present papers on it, and I've also thought about it, and I am not a believer in Bernoulli. In fact, I think planes are taking off just because of the angle of the wings. It has nothing to do with the pressure difference. So, but you're interested in starting a university. That was one of the things that one of our T-shirts was, starting a university in the sense of requiring. And I'll give you a story that's very interesting. A professor, a friend of mine, lived in Brazil. My wife's Brazilian. Luis Sarobal, I think is his name, and across the bay in Rio de Janeiro. He's an engineering teacher. And he would require his students to pick exactly what you said.
Really?
Yes, he would pick, for instance, a student pick a Big Bang.
Yeah.
And he required, it was a little different, he required that they look at both sides. In fact, they would not even receive a passing grade if they came back with only positive things about the Big Bang. They would have to go out there and also find things that could be wrong with it. Now, he did this for 4 years, and I was really excited. And I was going to say, I literally called him up, and I talked with him on the phone. I said, look, I'm here, I'm going to write all this down. What are you doing? This is working so well. And he goes, I can't talk about it anymore.
Oh, really? So
what happened was that I asked him what happened. He says, I'm no longer doing that at the university. And he's not even in physics. So I asked him what happened. He says, well, here's what happens. A third of the students loved it. It really opened up their brains. They liked the idea of being able to question. A third of the people didn't care and they just wanted their grade. And a third of the people were so upset with that, they started reporting on this professor, on what he was doing. And so it was really disappointing to me because I thought, here we are, here's a real example in a university where this guy is doing something really fantastic and, creating critical thinkers, and the whole thing was squashed by the students themselves, which was really remarkable.
For shame.
Yeah. So we only have a few more minutes. Comments, please, or are we just all tired and waiting for? Okay, Sandra.
Hello. Well, yes, it just popped into my mind that maybe one person that being sort of in the same situation currently has power and money and maybe able and willing to partner with you is Jordan Peterson, and he's been talking about also creating online university outside of the establishment because of the same reason, censorship, you know, sacred directions where all the students have to go. He wants to do something more open that includes science. Perhaps it's a project that could be catered to him, and he may be able to help. It just popped into my mind.
Thank you for the suggestion. We're not there yet because we can't tackle too many things at once, being realistic. So once our funding situation becomes stable and we have multiple projects that are funded and humming along very nicely, then we'll begin thinking about the university. We have only so much bandwidth.
No, but I mean, he could help with the funding thing.
Oh, well, we're delighted. Anybody who has interest, who has money, and has interest in doing something serious about alternative science, both from the funding point and the educational point, we'd love to hear from them.
We'd love to hear from him first. No, I'm kidding.
I'm going to shoot him an email. I don't know if he's going to respond.
Well, that's okay. I think one of the things is that one of the interesting things that you said, and I thought it was I hate the word genius, but it was a really brilliant idea. I think genius is more of an emotional thing. But it was a brilliant idea with your institute, was that how do you get around just funding a wonderful project and it dying, right? So you said, I'm going to fund it all around. Now I think with a university online, and not only just people who can help with it financially, but to gather people from around the world, so that this is not a one thing, the CNPS doing it, or Dr. Pollack doing it. This whole idea of you doing crowd creation, where all of a sudden we have Musa in Africa with young students and young minds there. And if Musa puts, my father and I want to do some courses that have to do with what we are doing here. Other people here as well. Musa has been teaching young minds there. He teaches courses. He could develop them on the same way. It could be that we put it in one place, but from many different directions. But I think this model, that was one of the most brilliant things I've heard, because how can you poo-poo that idea when all of a sudden you have all these other people? And that brings in the ego of competition, because then what happens is they're afraid that if you spread a germ over in China, or in Japan, or in Africa, the people are going to say, well, what if they take it and run? What if it's real?
Oh, yeah.
Then you get in that whole thing like, why do we fund stupid things like the Large Hadron Collider with no real reason? It's competition. That country, those countries want to be ahead. They don't even care, the politicians, what it is. But once you get that competition there, I think that was a very brilliant idea you had for the Institute.
Well, thank you. I hope it works. We hope it does. But the educational aspect is also extremely exciting for us, because most of the institutions, it's a dump of information, and the students are expected to absorb the information. Don't tell us that something might be wrong. That's not part of the general paradigm. Just memorize what we tell you, and if you feed it back to us in the right way, you can do well. And that's how it works. And so the idea of individuality and questioning what people are teaching you, that's not part of the university environment at all. It needs to change dramatically.
Well, I think it's in your talk, I think it's wonderful. What were the big breakthroughs in your group? Where were they coming from? Were the ones that were regurgitating what you wanted them to do?
No, not at all.
Exactly. No. And that's exactly where those things happen. And it's really rare, and that's one of the things I think that is just truly remarkable about Dr. Pollack, is that on top of doing this, I mean, he's here, and I don't think he's here because, oh, I don't fear, I can take it. It's because the philosophy is the same.
Yeah.
The philosophy is institutions. There are some parts of our institutions that work. Software engineering is one of them. But when we get to certain types of places in our educational system, what's failing are not the students or the professors. It's the system that we have there that that does not force people into critical thinking. And I think we're at a point of the science woke movement that I've went and registered, which people are becoming woke about what you read. Like you said, you can read it all day long in the paper. I don't care if it's politics, if it's a war that they want, if it's science or Bernoulli's effect or Coriolis effect. That Ray, he was looking at. He says, I see the hurricanes, but he gave a paper here because I'm going to test this with my own mind. And I think that attitude and having more and more people, and now we have a way on the internet to do this. There are universities, this university I'm sure is doing it too. The universities today know that being online is the future because there are non-brick and mortar universities. I see advertising in very expensive places that you're going, what the heck, and you look it up and it's like a building in Tennessee, but they got, 2,500 students paying tuition and getting real degrees, and it's no different because if we're sitting here, we've got an audience live, and if you can teach that same thing. So I think the time is right, and I think maybe what we can do is in our group start to look at all of our people involved in that, anybody involved in that, to start pooling our resources and information. If you're not ready for it, but we have people we can look into, who cares who starts it?
Totally.
It
would be wonderful. Yeah. And that model would be copied, I think, by others. Because everybody knows.
Yeah, the success alone will happen.
It will, totally. Yeah. On that happy note,
He needs to go. Well, thank you very much. A round of applause. He's got to go. We'll be back here for the banquet and he'll receive his award. Thank you.